The night was colder than usual, though it was the middle of summer. Emma Carter stood by the window of their tiny apartment, staring at the streetlights flickering outside. Her hands were trembling, not from the draft slipping through the cracked glass, but from the weight of her husband's words still echoing in the air. "You're useless, Emma. I can't carry a dead weight forever. Look at you. No money, no status, no ambition. What man would ever want a wife like that?" Andrew Weston, the man she once believed was her forever, spat those words with venom, his tie loosened after another late-night meeting. His eyes, once warm when they were young and struggling together, were now sharp and cruel, filled with nothing but contempt. Emma tried to speak, to remind him of the promises they had whispered on their wedding night, promises of loyalty through every storm. But her voice cracked, choked by the lump in her throat. She had given up everything to build this marriage, her youth, her dreams, her quiet strength, and now none of it mattered. Andrew wasn't finished. He smirked as if enjoying her pain. "I'm done with this shabby life. Vanessa's father is worth millions. She can give me the future I deserve. You're nothing but a mistake I intend to erase." His words sliced deeper than any blade. Vanessa. The woman Emma had suspected but never wanted to confront. So it was true. He wasn't just leaving her. He was replacing her. The betrayal burned hotter than fire. Emma clutched her chest, trying to breathe, her heart pounding like it wanted to break free. She was poor, yes. She worked endless hours at a small office just to pay the bills, just to keep their tiny apartment standing. But hadn't she stood by Andrew through his failures? Hadn't she been there when no one else believed in him? She whispered through tears. "How could you?" Andrew didn't even blink. He picked up his suitcase, already packed, and walked to the door. "Because, Emma, love doesn't pay the bills. Vanessa does." The slam of the door shook the walls, leaving Emma alone in the silence of their shattered home. The night stretched endlessly, filled with sobs that no one heard. She pressed her face into her hands, wondering how a heart that had once held so much love could now hold only ashes. But what Andrew Weston failed to see, blinded by greed and arrogance, was that Emma Carter's story was far from over. This was not her end. No, this was the beginning of something greater than either of them could imagine. For while Andrew thought he had left a broken, poor wife behind, fate had already written a twist so powerful it would turn his world upside down. Because Emma's next chapter would not just shock him, it would destroy the very pride he built his life upon. Emma Carter had never been the kind of woman to draw attention. She wasn't the glamorous socialite with diamond bracelets dangling from her wrists, nor the ambitious career woman climbing corporate ladders in sharp heels. She was ordinary, or at least that's what people saw. At 30 years old, Emma lived a quiet life in New York, working as a secretary at a small accounting firm. Her days were a blur of answering phones, typing reports, and balancing schedules for men who barely noticed her existence. At night, she returned to a modest apartment with peeling paint and a leaky faucet. Her wardrobe consisted mostly of second-hand blouses and worn shoes, and her idea of a luxury was a $5 latte she treated herself to once a month. But behind those tired eyes and calloused hands was a woman who carried a heart of gold. Emma wasn't weak. She was resilient, shaped by years of struggle. Born into a working-class family in Ohio, she had watched her parents sacrifice everything just to keep food on the table. Her father was a mechanic who came home with grease under his nails and back pain that never left. Her mother cleaned houses, her hands raw from endless scrubbing. They had little, but they taught Emma values no money could buy: kindness, loyalty, and strength in silence. Emma carried those lessons into adulthood. She didn't chase after wealth or fame. She believed in simple joys: cooking a warm meal, tending to the small plants on her windowsill, writing in a journal late at night. But love was the one thing she believed could transform an ordinary life into something extraordinary. And for a time, she thought she had found that love in Andrew Weston. When she met Andrew, he wasn't the arrogant man he had become. He was struggling then, a salesman trying to make his mark, his eyes filled with dreams bigger than his wallet. Emma saw past his flaws, past the ambition that sometimes bordered on desperation. She believed in him when others didn't. She encouraged him when he felt like giving up. She worked overtime so he could chase promotions. She skipped meals so he could buy a new suit for interviews. Every choice she made was for them, for the life she thought they would build together. That's why his betrayal cut so deep. Emma wasn't just losing a husband. She was losing the man she had given her soul to, the man she had fought for when the world mocked his failures. She had sacrificed herself piece by piece until nothing was left, only to be tossed aside like yesterday's trash. And yet, in that moment of despair, Emma's true character revealed itself. She didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't curse him as he walked away. She stood there trembling, yes, broken, yes, but also alive. Something inside her refused to die, a spark beneath the rubble of her pain. Emma Carter was not just a poor, abandoned wife. She was a woman forged by hardship, a woman who carried within her a strength no one, not even Andrew, had ever truly seen. And though she didn't know it yet, her story was about to collide with fate in a way that would elevate her from the shadows of insignificance to the dazzling spotlight of unimaginable power. For the world had underestimated Emma Carter, and that underestimation would be the very weapon she would use to rise. Because the woman everyone thought was ordinary was destined to become extraordinary. The city of New York never truly sleeps. Its streets pulse with ambition, its skyscrapers glow like monuments to dreams and broken promises. For Emma Carter, this city was both her cage and her stage. Every corner carried memories of struggle, every block whispered with secrets of survival. Her world before Andrew's betrayal had been confined to a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Queens. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors argue. The heater rattled like an old train, and the rent consumed nearly every paycheck. Yet Emma had made it a home. She decorated the shelves with secondhand books, framed photos of her parents, and tiny succulents she watered carefully. It wasn't much, but it was hers, or at least it had been until Andrew slammed the door and left her alone in that silence. The city's wealth and power had always felt distant to Emma, like stars too far away to touch. She walked past the luxury boutiques on Fifth Avenue with quiet longing, not envy, but a wishful sigh at the gowns displayed under golden lights. She rode the subway beside executives in tailored suits, clutching their leather briefcases while she carried her thrift store tote bag. In New York, the line between the rich and the poor wasn't just visible, it was carved into every street. But New York also carried promises of transformation. Somewhere amid the chaos, destiny had been waiting for Emma. The turning point came at one of the city's most dazzling landmarks, the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, a palace of marble floors and chandeliers the size of small cars. It was here, under the glittering lights of a charity gala, that Emma's two worlds, her broken past and her unimaginable future, would collide. The Grand Metropolitan wasn't a place Emma ever imagined entering. It was reserved for the elite, CEOs, philanthropists, celebrities. But fate has a way of rewriting stories. That night, Emma arrived not as the abandoned wife scraping by on pennies, but as the guest of someone whose presence alone commanded the attention of every soul in the room. The ballroom shimmered like something out of a dream. Crystal glasses clinked as laughter echoed across the polished marble. Women in sequined gowns floated across the floor while men in tuxedos whispered deals worth millions. The orchestra played a waltz that seemed to silence even the city's noise outside. To the wealthy, it was just another night of indulgence. To Emma, it was the stage where her rebirth would begin. And standing beside her was Alexander Blackwood, the billionaire who would soon become her greatest ally, protector, and husband. His hand resting lightly at her back, he guided her into the room with quiet confidence, his presence cutting through the crowd like a blade of authority. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. Whispers began to spread. No one recognized her at first. The woman who had once been invisible, living in the shadows of poverty. But in this setting, beneath the chandeliers and against the glow of wealth, Emma's transformation had begun. The contrast could not have been sharper. The girl who once counted every coin to pay rent now walked through the heart of luxury with a man who could buy the very building they stood in. And somewhere, fate prepared its cruelest twist, because Andrew Weston would soon enter this same room, unaware that the woman he had discarded was about to stand taller than he ever dreamed. The city that once swallowed Emma whole was now the city where she would rise. and her ex-husband's downfall would begin under these very lights. Andrew Weston had always been the kind of man who wanted more. More money, more recognition, more power. Even in his early days, when he was just a struggling salesman, he carried himself with a swagger that didn't quite fit his reality. He wore cheap suits as if they were tailored, boasted about promotions he hadn't earned, and spoke of a future dripping with success. For a while, Emma mistook that ambition for drive. She thought it meant he would fight for them, that he would build something solid on the foundation of their love. But ambition without integrity is poison, and Andrew was drowning in it. By the time he walked out on Emma, Andrew had already set his eyes on Vanessa Brooks, the daughter of a wealthy investor. Vanessa wasn't just beautiful. She was his ticket into a world he had always craved, but never truly belonged to. Through her, doors opened. Private clubs, luxury galas, the kind of boardroom meetings where fortunes are sealed with a handshake and a glass of champagne. Andrew relished it. He slipped into that world like a man slipping into a custom-made tuxedo. To outsiders, he appeared polished, successful, destined for greatness. But those who knew him closely saw the cracks. Beneath the charm was a deep insecurity, a gnawing hunger that could never be satisfied. He treated people as stepping stones, colleagues, friends, even Emma. To him, relationships weren't built on love or loyalty, but on transactions. What could this person do for him? How could they elevate his status? When Emma could no longer serve his ambitions, when her modest salary and humble background became a weight instead of a lift, he discarded her without hesitation. Andrew's cruelty wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the quiet jabs, mocking Emma for her worn-out shoes, sneering at the homemade dinners she prepared, scoffing at the way she clung to simple joys like reading old novels or tending to her plants. He thrived on making her feel small, because in his mind, her smallness made him look bigger. But his arrogance blinded him. He thought leaving Emma for Vanessa was an upgrade, a clean break from the life he despised. He told himself that Emma would fade into obscurity, forgotten like yesterday's news. He never imagined she would resurface, not stronger, not radiant, not standing beside a man whose wealth and influence made Andrew look like a child playing dress-up. What made Andrew dangerous wasn't just his greed, it was his pride. He could not stand the thought of losing, of being humiliated, of facing the world as less than the image he had built. And when he saw Emma again, no longer the poor wife he had abandoned, but the billionaire's wife who commanded the room, that pride would twist into rage. Andrew Weston believed he had won the game. He believed he was untouchable, a rising star who had traded wisely. But his fatal flaw was always the same. He underestimated the people he stepped on. And Emma Carter, the woman he once called useless, would soon become the mirror reflecting every ugly truth he had tried to hide. Because the higher Andrew climbed on the fragile ladder of pride, the harder his fall would be when Emma returned, and his downfall would be witnessed by everyone who once envied him. The night of the gala was supposed to be Andrew Weston's grand moment. He had spent weeks preparing, tailoring his tuxedo, rehearsing his speeches, ensuring that every guest with influence knew his name. To him, this was not just another charity event. It was his stage, the place where he would cement his reputation as the man who had made it. With Vanessa on his arm, dressed in a gown that shimmered like liquid silver, Andrew felt untouchable. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, each sparkle reflecting the wealth and arrogance of New York's elite. Champagne flowed like water, laughter bounced off marble walls, and every corner hummed with whispered deals worth millions. Andrew thrived in this atmosphere. He walked from group to group, flashing that practiced smile, shaking hands with CEOs, trading jokes with board members. He held Vanessa close, parading her like a trophy, proof that he had chosen well, proof that he had upgraded from his humble past. But then, the room shifted. Conversations hushed, heads turned toward the entrance. The orchestra faltered, just for a beat, as though the music itself recognized the presence that had just walked in. Emma. She entered not as the fragile, tear-stained woman Andrew had abandoned, but as someone transformed. Her gown was a masterpiece of elegance, deep emerald silk that clung in all the right places, her hair swept into a style that radiated sophistication. But it wasn't the dress, or the jewels, or even the quiet confidence in her steps that silenced the room. It was the man at her side, Alexander Blackwood. Billionaire, CEO, a name that made headlines, a presence that demanded attention. His hand rested protectively on Emma's back as though to say, "She is mine, and she is untouchable." Together they were the vision of power and grace, the couple no one dared whisper against. Andrew's glass slipped slightly in his hand. He forced a smile, but his eyes betrayed him. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Emma, his Emma, the woman he had mocked for being poor, was standing beside one of the most powerful men in the city. The murmurs started, spreading like wildfire. "Isn't that Emma Carter? I thought Andrew left her. She's with Blackwood now?" Unbelievable. Andrew's pride burned. He tightened his grip on Vanessa's arm, desperate to maintain composure. But Vanessa, sensing the shift in the room, leaned closer and whispered, "Who is she?" Her question stung worse than the whispers, because Andrew had no good answer. Emma's eyes met his across the ballroom. For a fleeting second, he saw the woman he had thrown away. But there was no pain in her gaze now, only strength, only a quiet triumph that pierced him deeper than any words. Desperate to regain control, Andrew laughed loudly, too loudly, drawing attention back to himself. He raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "let us toast to new beginnings." His voice wavered, and though the crowd humored him, their attention had already shifted. No one was looking at Andrew anymore. All eyes were on Emma and the billionaire at her side. The humiliation was public. The man who had once discarded her as worthless was now the forgotten one, while the woman he had broken stood higher than ever. And Andrew Weston, for the first time in his life, realized that the past he thought he had buried was about to come back to destroy him, in front of everyone who mattered. Emma left the gala that night with her head held high, but once the limousine doors closed and the city lights blurred past the windows, her strength cracked. Alexander squeezed her hand gently, offering the silent comfort of his presence, but even he couldn't silence the storm brewing inside her chest. She leaned back against the leather seat, closing her eyes. For hours she had stood tall, had smiled with quiet dignity, had faced Andrew's astonished glare without faltering. The world saw a woman reborn. But beneath the polished surface, Emma's heart still bled. When she finally returned to their penthouse, the grandeur of the space felt overwhelming. Marble floors stretched beneath her heels, crystal chandeliers glittered above her head, and the city skyline sparkled beyond the glass walls. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also alien. She had spent years in cramped apartments, saving every penny, cooking with chipped pans, patching her shoes instead of buying new ones. Now, surrounded by wealth beyond imagination, she felt small, out of place. Alone in her bedroom, Emma sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her face into her hands. The tears she had fought so hard to contain finally fell, hot and relentless. Memories came flooding back. Andrew's cruel words, his laughter as he walked out, the empty nights she had endured with nothing but silence for company. The humiliation of being abandoned, the shame of feeling unwanted, the ache of believing she had not been enough. She whispered into the darkness, "Why wasn't I enough?" That question dug deeper than any knife. It wasn't about Andrew anymore. It was about her. The scars he left weren't just on her heart. They were on her very sense of worth. Even now, with Alexander's love surrounding her, with luxury she had never dreamed of, the shadows of Andrew's betrayal still clung to her soul. The next morning, she tried to compose herself. She poured coffee into a delicate porcelain cup, but her hands shook so violently that it spilled onto the marble counter. Frustrated, she set the cup down, staring at her reflection in the mirror above the sink. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. She didn't see a billionaire's wife. She saw the same poor girl Andrew had discarded. Alexander entered quietly, his sharp suit contrasting the softness of his gaze. "Emma," he said gently, "you don't have to be strong every minute. Not with me." Her lips trembled. "You don't understand. They all looked at me last night, and for a moment I felt powerful. But inside I'm still the woman he called useless. I'm still broken." Alexander reached for her hands, steadying them. "No, you're not broken. You're surviving. And one day you'll see yourself the way I see you, a woman with more strength than anyone in that room." But Emma wasn't ready to believe him yet. Not fully. She nodded, wiped her tears, and forced herself to breathe. Yet the doubts remained, whispering in the corners of her mind, threatening to undo everything she had built. Because healing was never instant. Even when the world saw triumph, inside she still carried the weight of heartbreak. And as she stood by the window, staring down at the city below, she realized her battle wasn't just against Andrew anymore. It was against herself. And unless Emma found a way to silence the voices of doubt within, her new life could crumble just as quickly as her old one had. Emma had always thought her story was written in shadows. Poverty, betrayal, heartbreak. But fate had been quietly holding a secret, one that would rewrite everything she thought she knew about herself. It began with a letter. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled across the Manhattan skyline, Emma sat in Alexander's private study. The shelves were lined with books in leather bindings, their spines glinting gold under the lamplight. She wasn't looking for anything, only trying to distract herself with a novel. But when she pulled a book from the shelf, an envelope slipped out and fluttered to the floor. It was sealed, heavy, with her name written in elegant handwriting she hadn't seen in years. The sender, William Carter, her estranged uncle. Her heart thudded. She hadn't spoken to him since her mother's funeral, hadn't even thought about him. Her family ties were thin, frayed long ago by secrets her mother kept. With trembling fingers, Emma opened the envelope. Inside was a single-page letter and a set of documents. "My dear Emma," it began, "if you are reading this, then the time has come to claim what is rightfully yours." She read on, eyes widening. Her mother had hidden something from her, something monumental. The Carter family, once distant and unreachable, held shares in a global conglomerate worth billions. Her late mother, too humble to flaunt it, had placed those shares in a trust under Emma's name. For years, Emma had been the silent heir to a fortune she never knew existed. Her knees weakened. She sank into the leather chair, clutching the papers. Billionaire. The word didn't feel real. She, the woman who had been mocked for her second-hand dresses, who had been abandoned for being poor, had been sitting on a legacy that could rival Alexander's empire. When Alexander entered the study moments later, he found her pale, trembling, and speechless. "Emma? What's wrong?" Wordlessly, she handed him the documents. He skimmed them, his sharp eyes widening with recognition. "Emma," he whispered, "this changes everything." Her voice cracked. "All this time, I thought I had nothing. I thought I was worthless. But my mother, she protected me from this world. She didn't want wealth to define me." Alexander placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "And she was right. Wealth doesn't define you. Your strength does. But now you know, you're not just the woman Andrew abandoned. You are Emma Carter, heir to a fortune greater than anything he could ever touch." For the first time in years, Emma's tears weren't from pain, but from the shock of possibility. She wasn't powerless. She never had been. The woman Andrew had thrown away wasn't poor at all. She was a hidden diamond, her brilliance concealed until this very moment. And suddenly, her path became clear. She wouldn't just stand beside Alexander as his wife. She would stand beside him as an equal. Together, they could command an empire. Together, they could dismantle the man who had once made her feel small. The irony was almost too much to bear. Andrew Weston had left her because he thought she had nothing. But soon, the entire world would see the truth. Emma Carter had more than enough, and Andrew was about to learn the cost of underestimating her. The revelation of her hidden fortune did not change Emma overnight. Money alone couldn't erase the scars of betrayal or the shadows of self-doubt, but it gave her something she hadn't felt in years: control. For the first time, her future wasn't chained to survival. She had power, and with Alexander by her side, she had the courage to use it. Alexander insisted on one thing: "Emma, if you're going to face them, if you're going to face him, you can't walk into that world as the woman he abandoned. You must walk in as the woman you truly are." So, the transformation began. It wasn't just a new wardrobe, though that was part of it. Emma traded her faded blouses for couture gowns, her scuffed shoes for heels that gleamed under the light. But more than fabric and jewelry, it was about reclaiming the confidence Andrew had stolen. The first time she stood before the mirror in a sleek black dress, her hair swept up, emerald earrings glinting against her skin, she barely recognized herself. She wasn't the Emma who cried alone in a cheap apartment. She wasn't the Emma who whispered, "Why wasn't I enough?" She was a woman reborn. Her training went beyond appearance. Alexander arranged for her to work with some of the finest mentors, voice coaches, etiquette consultants, even a strategist who specialized in high society dynamics. She learned how to speak with poise, how to hold a room's attention, how to dismantle a man with nothing more than silence and a steady gaze. She studied finance too, diving into the details of her inheritance, determined not to let anyone control her wealth but herself. At first, it was overwhelming. Emma stumbled through introductions, forgot the right fork at formal dinners, even trembled during her first board meeting. But with each mistake, she grew sharper, steadier. And every time she faltered, Alexander was there, not to catch her, but to remind her that she could stand on her own. Weeks turned into months, and the woman who emerged was unrecognizable from the one Andrew had mocked. She wasn't just beautiful, she was formidable. She could command respect in a boardroom, charm a crowd at a gala, and carry herself with the kind of quiet confidence that no money could buy. Her first true test came at a private dinner attended by some of the city's most powerful figures. Rumors had already begun to circulate about Emma, the mysterious woman now at Alexander Blackwood's side. Whispers questioned her past, her origins, her right to belong. Emma entered that dinner with her head high, her steps steady. When one guest made a veiled comment about new money and charity cases, Emma smiled, not bitterly, not timidly, but with a calm grace that silenced the entire table. "Some fortunes are inherited," she said softly, "but strength is earned." The words hung in the air like a crown placed firmly on her head. That night, as Alexander watched her navigate the room with elegance and wit, he leaned in and whispered, "Do you see now? This is who you were always meant to be." Emma smiled faintly, her eyes glimmering with a fire Andrew had never been able to extinguish. She finally believed it. The woman Andrew Weston had thrown away was gone. In her place stood someone untouchable, unstoppable, and ready for the reckoning he never saw coming. The night of reckoning arrived in the most fitting place. Another grand gala, hosted at the Crystal Renaissance Hotel. It was the same type of glittering event where Andrew once flaunted his success and paraded Vanessa like a prize. But this time the spotlight would not shine on him. It would burn him. Emma walked into the ballroom with Alexander at her side. Cameras flashed instantly, the reporters buzzing. Whispers ran like wildfire through the crowd. "That's her, Emma Carter, Blackwood's wife." She glided across the marble floor, every step deliberate, her emerald gown flowing like liquid power. Alexander's presence was commanding, but it was Emma who stole the room. Andrew, standing near the stage with a glass of champagne, froze when he saw her, his face drained of color. Vanessa clung to his arm, confused by the sudden silence that rippled through the crowd. "Who is she?" Vanessa whispered again. Andrew couldn't answer. His eyes locked on Emma, and in that moment he knew. He was no longer the star of the evening. The host of the gala tapped the microphone, announcing a special address from one of the evening's honorary chairs, Emma Carter Blackwood. Gasps filled the room. Emma mounted the stage with poise, her chin lifted. She looked out over the sea of faces, powerful men, wealthy women, society's elite, all watching her. And then her eyes landed on Andrew. Her voice rang clear, steady. "Tonight is about giving back, about using privilege not as a weapon, but as a responsibility. I stand here not as someone who was born into ease, but as someone who knows struggle. I know what it feels like to be dismissed, to be told you're nothing. But I also know this: those who underestimate others often end up facing the greatest downfall." A murmur swept through the crowd. Some glanced toward Andrew, already connecting the dots. Emma didn't name him, but her words painted his betrayal for all to see. Andrew shifted uncomfortably, sweat gathering at his temples. Vanessa's grip on his arm tightened as realization crept across her face. The whispers grew louder. People remembered the way he had abandoned Emma, the cruel gossip he himself had spread about her. Then came the blow Andrew never saw coming. Emma revealed that she was not only Alexander's wife, but also an heir to a powerful trust that gave her independent control over a significant stake in several companies, including one Andrew had been desperately courting investors from. She didn't say his name, but when she announced that unethical business practices would be investigated and stripped from corrupt hands, Andrew knew. Everyone knew. The applause thundered. Emma stepped down from the stage, serene, untouchable. Alexander met her with a proud smile, his hand steady at her back. The cameras captured it all. Emma glowing with dignity, Andrew pale and trembling in the corner. Andrew tried to approach her, tried to salvage his pride. "Emma, wait! We should talk!" he hissed as she passed. Emma stopped, turned, and looked at him with eyes that no longer held pain, only power. "We have nothing left to say, Andrew. The world finally sees you for what you are, and they see me for what you never believed I could be." The crowd around them shifted, murmuring, watching. Andrew's humiliation was no longer private. It was complete, undeniable, and irreversible. And as Emma walked away, the man who once abandoned her for being poor realized he had lost everything, not to chance, but to the very woman he had underestimated. The city skyline glittered like 1,000 diamonds scattered against the night. Emma stood on the balcony of the Blackwood penthouse, the cool breeze brushing against her face. Below, New York buzzed with its endless rhythm, but here, high above the chaos, there was only peace. It had been months since the gala, the night Andrew's pride collapsed in front of everyone who once admired him. The scandal had spread like wildfire through newspapers and social media. His deals crumbled, investors pulled out, and Vanessa left him without hesitation. Andrew Weston, once desperate to be a star in the world of the elite, had been reduced to nothing but whispers of mockery. Emma, meanwhile, had risen higher than she ever thought possible. But it wasn't the wealth, the gowns, or the glamorous dinners that defined her triumph. It was the quiet strength she had rediscovered, the knowledge that she had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and humiliation, and had emerged unbroken. One evening, she sat with Alexander in the study. He poured her a glass of wine and asked softly, "Do you ever think about him? About Andrew?" Emma smiled faintly, the kind of smile born not from joy but from release. "I used to," she admitted. "I used to replay every word, every night he made me feel small. But now, no, he's part of my past, and the past doesn't define me anymore." Alexander nodded, his eyes filled with admiration. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known." Her strength, however, wasn't just for herself. Emma had begun channeling her newfound influence into something greater. She established a foundation dedicated to supporting women abandoned in times of hardship. Those who, like her, were once told they weren't enough. She funded shelters, scholarships, and career programs, each initiative built on the belief that no woman should ever feel powerless because of someone else's cruelty. At the launch of the foundation, Emma gave a speech that moved the entire audience to tears. Standing before a crowd of women and families, she spoke with her voice steady and full of conviction. "I was told I was worthless. I was told love only mattered if it came with money. But here I stand today, proof that no one has the right to measure your value by wealth, status, or appearance. Every one of us carries strength that cannot be bought or stolen. And when we rise not only for ourselves but for every woman who has ever been silenced." The applause thundered, not just for Emma's words, but for the truth she carried within them. That night, as she left the event, a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "You gave me hope," she whispered. "I thought I was alone, but now I know I can start again." Emma hugged her tightly, feeling the same fire that had once carried her out of the ashes. On the balcony once more, Emma gazed at the city. She thought of the girl she had once been, the one crying in a cheap apartment, believing her life was over. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had proven to herself and to the world that no betrayal could define her. Emma Carter had lost everything once, but in the end she gained something far greater: dignity, love, and a purpose that would outshine every diamond in the sky. And to every woman watching her story, she left one truth: women are never weak. They are unstoppable. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. Emma had been invited to the annual Winter Charity Ball at the Grand Metropolitan, this time as a guest of honor for her foundation's success. Her name was now whispered with respect across the city, her story admired as one of resilience and rebirth. She wore a gown of midnight blue, her hair cascading in soft waves, a diamond pendant resting delicately against her collarbone. Beside her, Alexander stood tall, the picture of power and devotion. Together, they commanded the ballroom effortlessly. The evening began like a dream. Guests flocked to greet them, offering congratulations, praising Emma's foundation, speaking her name with reverence. The orchestra filled the room with music, and the air carried the warm glow of admiration. For Emma, it was proof that she no longer lived in Andrew's shadow. But fate had had a cruel sense of timing. She caught sight of him across the ballroom, Andrew Weston. His presence was unmistakable, though his appearance had changed. Gone was the confident swagger, the smug smile of a man who thought he owned the world. He looked thinner, his tuxedo hanging awkwardly, his hair touched with stress. And yet, when his eyes found hers, a flicker of the old arrogance returned. Vanessa was gone. Instead, Andrew stood alone, clutching a glass of champagne as though it were armor. He tried to weave through the crowd, desperate to appear composed, but the whispers followed him like shadows. His scandals had spread too widely. His name was no longer associated with success, but with failure, betrayal, and disgrace. Emma felt her heart race. Memories rushed back. The night he left, the cruel words, the sound of the door slamming shut. For a fleeting second, she was that broken woman again. But then Alexander's hand brushed against hers, grounding her. She was no longer that woman. She was Emma Carter Blackwood, and she was untouchable. Andrew approached, forcing a smile. "Emma," he said, his voice too bright, too strained. "You look different." She met his gaze, calm and steady. Life has a way of changing people. His eyes darted to Alexander, then back to her. Jealousy and desperation burned in his expression. "So it's true," he muttered. "You married Blackwood. All of this," he gestured toward the glittering ballroom. "It's yours now." Emma didn't flinch. "It's not his wealth that defines me, Andrew. It never was. What I have now is dignity, something you never gave me." The crowd around them grew quieter, sensing the tension. Guests exchanged glances, whispers passing like sparks. Andrew's composure faltered. His pride demanded control, but his words betrayed him. "You think you're better than me now? You're just lucky. You were nothing without me." Emma's lips curved into the faintest smile, one that cut sharper than any insult. "No, Andrew. I was everything without you. I just didn't realize it yet." The silence that followed was deafening. Andrew's face flushed red, his grip on the champagne glass tightening until it nearly shattered. The humiliation was complete, not just because of Emma's words, but because the entire room had heard them. Emma turned to Alexander, her posture regal, her presence unshakable. Together, they walked away, leaving Andrew standing alone, a ghost of the man he once pretended to be. And in that moment, Andrew Weston finally understood. Emma was not only out of his reach, she was the living proof of his greatest mistake. Andrew Weston stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom long after Emma and Alexander had walked away. The glass in his hand trembled, the champagne sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Around him, conversations resumed, but not in the way they once did. People didn't turn toward him with admiration anymore. They turned to whisper, to smirk, to pity. The humiliation seared into his skin. He had expected to reclaim some dignity tonight, to show the city that Andrew Weston was still relevant. Instead, Emma's words had sliced through his pride like a blade. "I was everything without you." The sentence echoed in his mind, louder than the music, louder than the chatter of the crowd. For the first time in years, Andrew felt small. He stumbled to the bar, setting his glass down with a clatter. His reflection stared back at him from the mirrored shelves. Hollow eyes, tired lines across his forehead, a man who no longer resembled the confident figure he once pretended to be. "Mr. Weston?" a voice asked behind him. It was a former colleague, a man who once begged for Andrew's attention at every event. Now his tone carried mockery, wrapped in politeness. "Didn't expect to see you here. Quite the surprise, huh? Emma Carter. Or should I say Blackwood?" Andrew clenched his jaw. "She's nothing without me," he spat, though his words sounded weak, even to his own ears. The colleague raised an eyebrow, smirked, and walked away. That was the moment Andrew realized the truth. No one feared him anymore. No one respected him. His reputation, his connections, his carefully built facade, it had all crumbled. Later that night, he slipped out of the ballroom through a side exit, desperate to escape the whispers. The cold air hit him hard, sobering the dizzy fog of humiliation. He pulled his coat tighter and walked aimlessly down the street, replaying Emma's transformation in his mind. She had looked radiant, powerful, untouchable. The woman he had once mocked for her poverty had become someone the entire city revered. "How?" he asked himself, bitterly. How had she risen from the ashes he left her in? How had she gained more power, more respect, more wealth than he could ever dream of? Jealousy twisted inside him, sharp and relentless. The thought of Emma living a life of luxury, of Alexander Blackwood's arm around her waist, drove him mad. She was supposed to be broken, forgotten, begging for scraps. Instead, she had risen higher than him, and in front of everyone. Andrew returned to his apartment, a stark contrast to the glamour he once flaunted. The space was smaller now, rented with what little he had left after bad investments and legal troubles. He poured himself a drink, his hands shaking as he gulped it down. The alcohol didn't soothe him, nothing could. He slammed the glass onto the counter, shattering it. His breathing grew ragged as anger consumed him. She thinks she's won, he muttered to himself. But this isn't over. Emma Carter will regret humiliating me. Yet beneath the rage was something else, fear. Fear that he was powerless, fear that the world had moved on without him, fear that Emma's success had permanently overshadowed him. For a man like Andrew, whose entire identity was built on pride, it was the worst punishment imaginable. And as he stared into the broken shards of glass, Andrew Weston swore he would fight to regain control, even if it meant destroying the woman he once vowed to love. The very next week, Andrew Weston tried to reclaim what little dignity he had left. He appeared at another social function, a business networking cocktail held at the Park Avenue Club. It was smaller than the gala, but still brimming with CEOs, financiers, and journalists. For Andrew, it was a chance to rewrite the narrative. He arrived early, dressed in his sharpest tuxedo, his smile rehearsed in the mirror. He planned to dominate the room, to talk loudly of deals and investments, anything to distract from the humiliation of the previous gala. Yet the moment he stepped inside, he felt it. The shift, the whispers, the smirks. People no longer greeted him with respect. Instead, they eyed him with curiosity, some even with open disdain. It wasn't long before Emma and Alexander arrived, their entrance as seamless as royalty. The room shifted instantly toward them. Emma wore a crimson gown that glowed under the chandelier, her confidence radiating with every step. Alexander walked beside her, exuding authority. Together, they were unstoppable. Andrew's chest tightened, rage simmered. He couldn't bear to be invisible again. When the microphone was passed around for introductions, Andrew seized his moment. He cleared his throat and spoke loudly, forcing the crowd to turn toward him. Some of us, he said with a smug grin, didn't need to marry into wealth to make a name for ourselves. Unlike certain people here tonight. Gasps rippled through the audience. All eyes shifted from Andrew to Emma. For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Andrew smirked, convinced he had regained control. But Emma didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her voice calm, steady, and cutting sharper than any blade. "It's true," she said softly. "I did not marry Alexander for wealth. Because what Andrew Weston forgets, what he hopes you'll all forget, is that long before I married anyone, I already had my own fortune. A legacy my mother entrusted to me. A fortune Andrew knew nothing about because he never cared to see me as anything but small." Murmurs swept through the room. Guests leaned closer, intrigued. Emma continued, her tone firm. "Andrew abandoned me because he thought I was poor. He humiliated me for not being enough. But what he never understood is that true worth is not measured by money, it's measured by integrity. And integrity is something he has never possessed." The audience erupted in quiet applause, not for the insult, but for the truth. Emma's words had struck deep, not just at Andrew's pride, but at the very foundation of his lies. He stood frozen, his face red, his smile collapsing. A journalist raised her phone, recording. "So the rumors are true," she whispered. "She's wealthier than him, and stronger." Andrew's attempt to humiliate Emma had backfired spectacularly. Instead of tarnishing her image, he had exposed himself once more. The crowd turned away from him, their focus entirely on Emma and Alexander, their admiration written across every face. Andrew tried to speak again, his voice breaking. "You think you're better than me? This isn't over." Emma didn't even look at him. She turned, her arms slipping into Alexander's, her posture regal. "It was over the moment you left me, Andrew." The crowd erupted in applause again, louder this time. Cameras flashed. Andrew was left standing alone, a man stripped bare in the very world he once craved. And as the night drew on, Andrew realized the cruelest truth. He hadn't just lost Emma. He had lost the war for respect, and the world would never let him forget it. The night after Andrew's failed attempt to shame Emma, the story spread like wildfire. By morning, it wasn't just whispered in the ballrooms of Manhattan. It was splashed across headlines, dissected in business columns, and circulated on every gossip subtype. Emma Carter Blackwood silences ex-husband in spectacular fashion. From abandoned wife to billionaire heiress, Emma Carter's stunning transformation. Andrew Weston humiliated, former darling of Wall Street, falls from grace. Andrew woke to the sound of his phone buzzing relentlessly. At first he thought it was good news, perhaps an investor finally returning his calls. But as he scrolled through the notifications, his stomach dropped. Every headline dragged his name through the mud. Every article painted him not as the charming businessman he once pretended to be, but as a cruel opportunist who had discarded his wife, only to be crushed by her success. The ridicule was merciless. At coffee shops, strangers chuckled over tabloids with his photo on the cover. On social media, his name trended for all the wrong reasons. Memes flooded Twitter, mocking him with captions like, "Imagine leaving your wife for money only to find out she had more than you." His reputation, once carefully polished, was now a punchline. Meanwhile, Emma's name soared. She was praised not only for her elegance and strength, but also for her foundation's growing impact. Talk shows invited her as a guest, magazines begged for interviews, and women across the country hailed her as a symbol of resilience. She wasn't just Emma Carter anymore. She was a movement. For Andrew, every day became a fresh humiliation. Potential partners canceled meetings, wary of associating with his tarnished image. Investors pulled funding, citing instability and lack of credibility. Even old friends began to distance themselves, unwilling to be linked with his disgrace. One afternoon, he stormed into a cafe only to hear two businessmen at the next table murmuring about him. "He's finished," one said. "Imagine thinking you upgraded, and then your ex becomes more powerful than you," the other laughed. Andrew slammed his coffee down so hard it spilled, glaring at them. They looked up, startled, before smirking knowingly. That was the worst part, no one feared him anymore. They laughed at him openly because they knew he was powerless. Back at the Blackwood estate, Emma watched the same headlines with quiet reflection. She didn't revel in Andrew's downfall, though she couldn't deny the poetic justice. What struck her most was how quickly the narrative had changed. Once, she had been the subject of pity, whispered about as the poor woman discarded by her husband. Now she was the victor, the heroine of her own story. Alexander joined her on the terrace, handing her a cup of tea. "They're calling you unstoppable," he said, smiling. Emma shook her head softly. "I'm not unstoppable. I'm just finally free. Free of his shadow, free of his cruelty." But freedom didn't mean the storm was over. Rumors had power, and while most painted her in a favorable light, others began to speculate. Some questioned her inheritance, others probed her past, looking for weaknesses. The higher she rose, the more scrutiny she faced. And Andrew, though beaten, wasn't finished. In a dingy apartment across town, Andrew stared at the headlines, rage bubbling beneath his shame. "She thinks this is over," he muttered. "She thinks she's untouchable. But I'll prove her wrong." Because rumors may have destroyed his image, but Andrew Weston wasn't ready to disappear. He was ready to fight back, and his revenge would be ruthless. Andrew Weston had always been a man fueled by pride. Now that pride was shattered, replaced with something darker, hatred. Night after night, he replayed Emma's words in his mind, each sentence slicing deeper into his ego. The humiliation at the gala, the ridicule in the press, the whispers on the street, they all lit a fire that consumed him. He couldn't let it end this way. He couldn't let Emma win. Sitting in his dim apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills and empty bottles, Andrew scribbled furiously in a notebook. His mind, once clouded by arrogance, was now sharp with desperation. "If I can't rebuild my name," he muttered, "then I'll drag hers down with me." His plan began with rumors. He reached out to contacts, shady reporters, disgruntled former employees, anyone willing to smear Emma's name for a price. He crafted stories that Emma had manipulated her inheritance, that she had trapped Alexander into marriage, that her foundation was nothing more than a money laundering scheme. Lies, yes, but lies spread faster than truth. At first it worked. A few gossip columns hinted at impropriety. Anonymous posts appeared online, questioning Emma's character. Can a woman really rise that quickly without playing dirty? One headline sneered. Andrew grinned bitterly as he clipped the articles. But whispers weren't enough. He needed something bigger. Something that would explode in public. That's when he found his opening. One of Alexander's rival companies had recently lost a major contract to Blackwood Enterprises. Bitter, vengeful, and looking for leverage, the rival CEO was willing to listen when Andrew approached him. Over a tense dinner, Andrew made his pitch. I know things about Emma Carter Blackwood. He lied smoothly. I can give you the scandal you need to weaken Alexander. Together, we can ruin them both. The rival leaned back, intrigued. And what's in it for you? Andrew's smile was cold. Satisfaction and a chance to reclaim what was stolen from me. The partnership was born. Andrew fed the rival doctor documents, forged emails, fabricated evidence that painted Emma as a fraud. In exchange, the rival funneled him money and resources to fuel the campaign. Together, they plotted a public exposure, a staged leak that would erupt at the next high-profile charity event Emma was set to attend. But Andrew's obsession blinded him. He didn't care about the consequences, didn't care that innocent people might get caught in the crossfire. All he saw was Emma's face, radiant and powerful, mocking him. All he wanted was to see her crumble, to see her reputation destroyed as thoroughly as his. Late one night, Andrew stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie. His reflection looked different now. Gaunt, eyes sunken, but burning with determination. You thought you were free of me, Emma, he whispered. But you'll never be free. I made you once, and I'll break you again. Across the city, Emma remained unaware of the storm gathering. She was focused on her foundation's next project, on building a future brighter than her past. But the darkness she thought she had escaped was clawing its way back, and Andrew was ready to strike. And when his revenge unfolded, it wouldn't just threaten Emma's reputation, it would put everything she had built, and everyone she loved, on the line. The rumors hit Emma like a tidal wave. At first, it was just whispers. Anonymous blogs accusing her of manipulating her inheritance, tabloids hinting that her marriage to Alexander was a calculated move. But soon, the lies grew louder, spreading across television segments and business journals. Emma Carter Blackwood, heiress or hustler, one headline screamed. She sat in her office at the foundation, staring at the stack of newspapers, her chest tightening. For a moment, the old Emma resurfaced, the woman who once believed Andrew's cruel words, who once felt powerless. But this time, she wasn't alone. Alexander stood by her side, calm but fierce. Don't let this break you, he said, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. This is his doing. I can recognize his fingerprints all over this. Emma swallowed hard. Andrew. Just saying his name filled her with both fury and sorrow. She had hoped their last encounter had closed the chapter, but now she realized he would never let her go. Instead of collapsing under the weight of the rumors, Emma made a choice. She would fight back. Her first step was transparency. She called a press conference at the Blackwood Foundation headquarters. The room filled with reporters, their cameras flashing as Emma stepped to the podium in a simple navy dress. Her voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. I know there are stories circulating about me, she began. Stories meant to discredit my work, my marriage, my character. Let me be clear, they are lies. My inheritance was entrusted to me by my late mother, and every dollar I have received has been documented, audited, and used for the betterment of others. As for my marriage, love is not a transaction. Alexander and I stand together, not because of wealth, but because of respect. She paused, scanning the crowd. Those who spread these lies do not want to expose the truth. They want to destroy it. But I will not be silenced. I will not be broken. The press erupted with questions, but Emma had made her point. By addressing the rumors directly, she had shifted the narrative. Her confidence became the headline, her strength the story. Behind the scenes, Emma and Alexander worked tirelessly with their legal team. They traced the forged documents, the fake emails, the planted stories. Every thread led back to one source, Andrew Weston. And when they uncovered his alliance with a rival CEO, the evidence became undeniable. But Emma didn't just want to prove her innocence. She wanted to expose Andrew for what he truly was. With Alexander's support, she organized a gala of her own. This time, the theme was transparency and accountability, a stage not only to celebrate the foundation's success, but also to reveal the truth. Guests from the business world, media, and high society gathered expecting another night of glitter and speeches. They didn't know they were about to witness a reckoning. As Emma took the stage, she projected a calm strength. "Tonight," she said, "is about more than charity. It's about truth. For weeks, lies have been spread about me, designed to tear down what we've built. But the truth always comes to light." The screens behind her lit up, displaying documents, real ones. Proof of her legitimate inheritance, financial audits, records of her foundation's impact. And then came the twist: leaked emails between Andrew and his business partner, plotting her destruction. The room gasped as the evidence unfolded. Emma stood tall, her voice steady. "This is the man who sought to ruin me. The man who abandoned me once, and now sought to do it again. But I will not allow it. Not for myself, and not for the women I represent." The crowd erupted in applause. Emma had not only defended herself, she had turned Andrew's attack into his public undoing. And as Andrew's name once again became synonymous with disgrace, Emma realized she was no longer reacting to his cruelty. She was leading the fight, and she was winning. When Emma's gala ended, the fallout began almost instantly. The leaked emails between Andrew Weston and the rival CEO spread across every news outlet in New York. Headlines that once mocked Emma now turned viciously toward Andrew. "Andrew Weston exposed. Plot to ruin ex-wife backfires." Disgraced businessman linked to corporate sabotage. From Wall Street to rock bottom, the fall of Andrew Weston. By dawn, Andrew's face was plastered across every television screen, not as the ambitious success story he once pretended to be, but as the villain who tried to destroy a woman who had already survived him once. His phone rang non-stop, but not with opportunities. Only reporters hungry for quotes, creditors demanding money, and lawyers threatening lawsuits. The rival CEO who had backed him quickly distanced himself, releasing a statement claiming Andrew had acted independently and without authorization. Investors pulled out overnight. Former colleagues who once clung to his side now cut all ties, leaving him to sink alone. For Andrew, the humiliation was unbearable. He stormed into his office, only to find security guards waiting. "Mr. Weston," one of them said stiffly, "you're no longer welcome here. Your position has been terminated." "What?" Andrew barked. "This is my company." "Not anymore," the guard replied, handing him an envelope. "The board voted unanimously this morning, effective immediately." The office that once echoed with his false confidence was stripped from him. He walked out carrying a single box of belongings, passing employees who avoided his gaze. Some whispered, some smirked. Not one showed sympathy. By evening, the internet was merciless. Memes flooded every platform. Andrew's photo next to captions like "left his wife for money," "ended up broke," and "karma wears high heels." Talk show hosts laughed at his downfall. Comedians roasted him on late-night TV. His name had become a punchline. Meanwhile, Emma's star only rose higher. The very scandal Andrew orchestrated to destroy her had strengthened her reputation. People admired how she had handled the smear campaign with dignity and courage. Donations to her foundation doubled. Invitations poured in from global conferences, women's rights panels, and business summits. She had become more than a symbol. She was now a force. Andrew sat in his dim apartment, surrounded by the remnants of his arrogance. Bills piled high. Eviction notices slipped under the door, and bottles of cheap liquor cluttered the floor. He turned on the TV only to see Emma's face again. Smiling, radiant, her voice strong as she spoke about integrity and empowerment. The crowd applauded her while Andrew sat in silence, a bitter ghost of the man he once pretended to be. He smashed the remote against the wall, his rage consuming him. "They'll forget her," he snarled. "They'll move on. This can't be the end for me." But deep down, he knew the truth. His empire was gone. His reputation was in ashes, and unlike Emma, there was no second chance waiting for him. The cruel irony was undeniable. He had left Emma because he thought she was worthless, poor, beneath him. Now she was everything he had ever wanted: respected, admired, powerful. And he was nothing. Andrew Weston's name, once polished with ambition, was now a permanent stain, a cautionary tale of greed, betrayal, and downfall. And worst of all, his ruin had been sealed not by his enemies, but by the woman he had underestimated most. The storm had finally passed. Andrew Weston's downfall was complete. His name dragged through the mud, his empire reduced to rubble. For the first time in years, Emma Carter could breathe without the weight of his shadow pressing against her chest. But catharsis doesn't arrive in the headlines or the applause of strangers. It arrives in the quiet, when the noise fades and you are left alone with yourself. It was late evening when Emma found herself on the terrace of the Blackwood estate, staring out at the New York skyline. The city lights twinkled like stars against the dark canvas of night. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from the flood of emotions that had been locked away for so long. Alexander stepped outside, carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside her, then wrapped his arm gently around her waist. "It's over," he whispered. "He can't touch you anymore." Emma's eyes glistened. "I know," she said softly, "but why does it still hurt? Why do I still hear his words in my head?" Alexander turned her to face him, his gaze steady. "Because wounds don't vanish just because justice is served. Healing isn't about forgetting the pain, it's about choosing not to let it own you." The tears finally spilled down her cheeks. For years she had carried the weight of Andrew's cruelty, his betrayal, his rejection. She had built walls around her heart, convinced herself she had to be stronger, harder, untouchable. But in Alexander's arms, she allowed herself to crumble. Not as a victim, but as a survivor, releasing the last of her burden. "I gave him everything," she whispered, "my love, my time, my faith, and he told me I was nothing." "And now?" Alexander asked gently. Emma looked out at the city again. "Now I know I was always enough, more than enough. He just couldn't see it." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with the weight of release. Emma felt as though a chain had finally snapped, one she hadn't even realized she was still dragging. The next morning, she visited her parents' graves in Ohio. She hadn't been back in years. Too consumed by survival, then by her new life. She knelt down, her fingers brushing against the cool stone, and whispered, "I did it. I finally did it. You always told me I was stronger than I believed, and you were right." Her voice cracked, but this time it wasn't from sorrow. It was from peace. Later, back in New York, Emma sat in her office at the foundation, surrounded by the women she had vowed to help. Survivors of abandonment, betrayal, and hardship looked at her with admiration, not because she was a billionaire's wife, but because she understood their pain. She had lived it. She had survived it. One young woman asked timidly, "How did you keep going when everything felt hopeless?" Emma smiled gently. "I cried. I broke. I thought I couldn't survive. But every day, I reminded myself of one thing. Pain doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're still alive. And as long as you're alive, you can rise again." In that moment, Emma realized that her true victory wasn't Andrew's downfall. It wasn't the wealth, the status, or even the love she found with Alexander. Her true victory was freedom. The freedom to live without shame, without fear, without the voice of a cruel man dictating her worth. For the first time in her life, Emma Carter felt whole. And in that wholeness, she discovered the greatest truth of all. Healing is the most powerful revenge. Andrew Weston's fall from grace was no longer just a story whispered among the elite. It had become a spectacle, a cautionary tale replayed across news networks, social media feeds, and dinner conversations. Once hailed as a rising star, Andrew was now the embodiment of greed, betrayal, and ruin. His apartment was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a broken clock. The luxury furniture he once flaunted was gone, repossessed to pay debts. Bills piled on the counter, unopened, threatening. Calls from creditors went unanswered. His once prized suits hung loosely on his gaunt frame, reminders of a man he no longer recognized. Vanessa, the woman he had sacrificed Emma for, had left him the moment his fortune dried up. The irony was cruel. He had abandoned his wife for wealth, only to be abandoned himself when that wealth vanished. He had traded loyalty for illusion, and now he stood with nothing. One rainy morning, Andrew walked into a cafe he used to frequent. Heads turned, but not with admiration. Some people whispered, others chuckled. A man at a corner table muttered just loud enough for Andrew to hear, "That's him, the one who left his wife for money and ended up broke. Serves him right." Andrew's fists clenched, but he said nothing. The humiliation was relentless. When he tried to apply for new business ventures, no one returned his calls. Banks refused to lend to him. Investors dismissed him outright. Even his old friends refused to meet, afraid their reputations would be tainted by association. He was a man exiled, not by law, but by the court of public opinion. But the worst punishment was not financial ruin, it was the isolation. At night, Andrew sat alone in his empty apartment, the silence pressing down like a weight. He thought of Emma, radiant in the headlines, admired by millions. He thought of the nights he told her she was worthless, the cruel smirk as he packed his suitcase to leave her. And now, with nothing but shadows for company, he realized the truth. He had destroyed himself long before Emma exposed him. One evening, unable to sleep, Andrew walked past the Blackwood Foundation building. Through the glass walls he saw Emma speaking with a group of women. She was laughing, her expression soft, her presence radiant. The women looked at her with hope in their eyes, clinging to her every word. She had become something far greater than Andrew could ever comprehend. A symbol of resilience. For a fleeting moment, Andrew's chest tightened. He remembered the young woman he once met, the one who believed in him when no one else did. He remembered her loyalty, her sacrifices, her quiet love. And he realized, perhaps for the first time, that he had thrown away the one person who ever truly saw him. But remorse came too late. Emma turned slightly, her gaze brushing past the window. Their eyes met for the briefest second. There was no hatred in her expression, no bitterness, only indifference. And that indifference cut deeper than any scorn could. Andrew stepped back into the shadows, his chest hollow. For him, there would be no redemption, no triumphant comeback. His punishment was not just the loss of wealth or status, it was living with the knowledge that the woman he had once mocked as nothing had risen to everything, while he had sunk into nothingness. And as the rain poured down, Andrew Weston finally understood that betrayal always carries a price, and his had cost him everything. The seasons shifted, and with them, so did Emma Carter's life. What began as a story of heartbreak had transformed into something far greater, a story of renewal, strength, and love. The woman once abandoned for being poor was now standing at the height of her power, not just because of wealth, but because she had found herself again. Months after Andrew's collapse, Emma stood in the grand ballroom of the Blackwood Foundation's new headquarters. The walls shimmered with light, filled with photographs of projects funded across the country. Shelters built for women and children, scholarships awarded to young girls, career programs lifting families out of despair. Every corner of the room was alive with hope, and at the center of it all was Emma, glowing in a gown of soft ivory, her smile warm and genuine. Beside her stood Alexander, his hand resting gently in hers. Their marriage had become not a display of power, but a partnership of equals. Together they weren't just symbols of wealth, they were builders of legacies. Every glance between them spoke of respect, love, and unshakable loyalty. As the evening continued, Emma gave a speech. Her voice rang clear across the hall. There was a time, she began, when I thought my life was over. I thought betrayal had destroyed me. But pain, as I've learned, is not the end of a story. It's the beginning of a new one. What defines us is not who leaves us, not who betrays us, but who we choose to become after. The audience listened in silence, their eyes glistening. I was told I was nothing, and yet here I stand, not because of money, but because I finally believed in myself. And now I dedicate my life to helping others believe in themselves too. Every woman, every man, every child deserves the chance to rise again. The room erupted in applause. Emma stepped down from the stage into Alexander's arms. He whispered in her ear, "I've never been prouder of you." In the weeks that followed, Emma's foundation expanded internationally, touching lives far beyond New York. Letters poured in from women she had inspired, families she had saved, young girls who now dreamed bigger because of her story. She was no longer just Emma Carter Blackwood. She was a beacon of resilience for countless people. One quiet evening, she and Alexander walked along the gardens of their estate. Fireflies glimmered in the air, and the soft scent of roses surrounded them. Emma paused, looking up at the stars. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "about how different everything could have been if Andrew hadn't left?" Alexander squeezed her hand. "Maybe your path would have been different, but I believe it would still have led you here, to the woman you are meant to be. Strong, compassionate, unstoppable." Emma smiled, her heart full. "Then I wouldn't change a thing. As they walked back toward the house, Emma felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The ghosts of the past were gone. The scars remained, yes, but they were no longer wounds. They were reminders of how far she had come. Andrew Weston's name faded into obscurity, remembered only as a warning of arrogance and greed. But Emma Carter's name lived on, etched in hearts, spoken with admiration, a story of triumph that would inspire generations. And so the woman once abandoned for being poor found not only love and dignity, but also a purpose that made her richer than she ever imagined. In the end, Emma Carter did not just survive, she thrived. And her story became proof that true happiness is not found in wealth, but in rising above the pain and choosing to shine. So that's how the story closes, my wonderful friends. You're still here with me, right? If you've stayed until now, it must mean something in this story has touched your heart in a way words alone can't explain. And maybe that's the real point. Life breaks us, but it also gives us the chance to rise stronger than before. Emma's journey shows us that betrayal, humiliation, and pain don't define who we are. What defines us is how we choose to respond. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Emma found her strength not by seeking revenge alone, but by choosing healing, dignity, and a higher purpose. And that's the lesson for all of us. When life knocks you down, you are not powerless. You are in control of your next step, your next choice, your next chapter. Pain is real, but so is resilience. If this story gave you something, strength, hope, maybe even just a spark, then I invite you, like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and don't forget to subscribe. Our stories don't end in pain, my friends. They begin in how we rise.